people suffering from depression or anxiety could lose access to sickness benefits. This is part of the government's major welfare reforms.
Yeah, interesting this really. So the Work and Pensions Secretary, Mel Stride, has been quite outspoken on this. Is set to announce plans to overhaul the way that disability benefits work. In a statement in the Commons today, it could include a plan to replace cash payments with vouchers.
Yes, interesting one, that. I guess the idea is that if you give cash in the form of vouchers instead, then they can choose what it is spent on, i.e. no booze or fags. I imagine that is the point of that.
What I'm keen to hear from with our viewers here, so gbnews.com/your say, is this. Now, people can be off, there might be loads of you now, I don't know, sitting at home, who've got, genuinely a really bad back or a bad hip, a physical disability, desperate to work, want to work, physically can't work. And then you have millions of people who are saying they've got really bad anxiety or depression. Obviously, loads of those people will, but I think there is an implication, isn't there, that maybe some of those people are on the take. How do you feel about that? So get your views coming in.
Yes, and of course the numbers have dramatically increased since the COVID days. So our big question today, should work-shy Brits be forced back into work? Joining us now to debate this is the former leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton, and the author and broadcaster, Rebecca Reid. Thank you very much indeed. Neil, should they?
Yeah, well, I mean, the sickness benefit bill for this country is £66 billion this year, and that's forecast to rise on present trends to 90 billion by 2029. We've got 5.2 million people who are on out of work benefits. That's 16% of the workforce. And if you look at young people between the ages of 18 and 24, we've got nearly 200,000 of them who are economically inactive, supposedly for mental health issues. And that's double what it was 10 years ago. We all know that lockdowns have been a big contributor to this trend, because people got used to being paid for doing nothing. So it's time to wake people up and say, we can't carry on like this. We have to go back to life in the real world.
All right, Rebecca, people have got too used to being paid to do nothing.
I'm not sure it's that. I think we're a surprisingly unhealthy and ill country, and I think that our mental health services are pretty poor. The biggest demographic of people who are now not working, the biggest rise, is in middle-class, middle-aged people. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that there is a genuine mental health crisis in the country. Now, I don't believe that this idea of, like, if you're mentally ill, just stay at home, stay in bed, it's all okay, is good for you. If you're mentally ill, I have anxiety, it gets worse if I don't go out, touch some grass, see some sky, move my body. But unfortunately, we don't have services to help people to become less mentally ill quickly. What we do is either give them antidepressants or sort of write them off completely. And there's not enough option to be able to work part-time, work flexibly, so that you can be economically active while also improving your mental health.
Well, Neil, let's be honest. The government locked us all down on and off for a couple of years. That was bound to have an impact on mental health and also attitudes towards work. I mean, furlough literally paid us to sit at home and do nothing. So has our culture changed dramatically? And actually, is it the fault of the government?
I think that's a big part of it, undoubtedly. People did get used to being paid to do nothing, and the same as all these people are supposedly working from home or shirking from home, as I think is very often the better way to put it. I mean, I love Rebecca because she always likes to think the best of people, and we'd all like to do that. But there are loads of people swinging the lead who are abusing the system. It's perfectly obvious from the figures. Why should mental health issues really be so much worse, if you take the figures at face value, than they were 10 years ago? And what about taking responsibility for your own health in these respects? We all know it's much better for your mental health, as Rebecca said a minute ago, to be doing something useful, doing something active, being with other people, rather than vegetating at home. And I think people have got to be forced to do this if they're not willing to try for themselves.
Yeah, and Rebecca, look, I think there will be people watching this show now who are desperate to work, who have some form of physical disability, either through an accident or just a disability in general, who are looking at this thinking, actually, they would be desperate to get into the workforce, and that there are too many people who find it too easy to say, I've got mental health, and they can sign off. Is that unfair?
In that accent.
I think it's always super easy to just look for a sort of faceless concept of the person whose responsibility anything is. We like to make everything somebody else's fault. It's a bit like how we used to say immigrants are coming over and taking our jobs. Now there are these fictional mentally ill people who are getting bankrolled to do nothing. You know, it's a very small amount of money, and it is very hard to be signed off for mental health. You have to have quite a considerable, noteworthy mental illness to be unable to work. But I think the best system here would be if there were things that you could do. We live in an age of incredible technology. There should be an equivalent of FDR's New Deal, where if you needed work, you could go and get work in the 1930s. That should be possible from home remotely.
I mean,
if
Rebecca,
you are physically unable to work or mentally, you should be able to pick up shifts. You shouldn't have to be in full time all the time or nothing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, but it's quite incredible to think. Recent stat, nearly £300 million a year being spent on disability benefits for ADHD. I mean, we can't afford this as a country.
I could sign off on that.
Can't afford it.
But as somebody who has ADHD, I have to have a very silly career to be able to work. Like, it genuinely does make you very bad at a lot of things. And there is not enough jobs talking about your feelings on telly for everybody who has ADHD to be able to get them.
Neil, just that point, just lastly to you, Neil, that the extraordinary cost, I think this is something that people just ignore. Can we physically, as a country, afford to pay for so many millions of people to be out of work? I mean, how high are our taxes going to go?
What are we paying for, Neil?
You're absolutely right. As I said a moment ago, we're £66 billion this year being spent on sickness benefits, and 16% of our workforce, people of working age, are out of work benefits. I mean, no prosperous society can withstand that kind of figure indefinitely, and the trend is getting worse. You know, the percentages are going up. Eventually, no doubt, they'll hit a ceiling when they get to 100% people doing nothing. But we can't just wait around for that to happen. Something's got to be done now.
Well, we've certainly got ourselves into a little bit of a pickle, that's for sure. Neil Hamilton, thank you so much. Rebecca Reid, too. Nothing wrong with the few ADHD-like features, are there, Patrick?
No, absolutely not.
Nothing wrong.
Absolutely not. Nothing wrong with this at all. I've made a career out of it. But what I will say is it's also the fraud. £11 billion worth of benefits fraud in 2 years. So, that's bonkers. I have a huge amount of sympathy for people who've got genuine disabilities, both mental and physical.
Of course, yeah.
But that's not who we're talking about here, is it?
I just can't get over that figure, £300 million on ADHD as a disability.
Vouchers over cash, I think. Vouchers over cash.
But maybe you've got ADHD and can't work. Let us know. gbnews.com/your say.
All right. Look, up next, it's a GB News exclusive. Migrants are using children as human shields to stop police